This will sound very strange, but many Church of Philadelphia prophetic signs, including the 2022 World Series between the Houston Astros and the Philadelphia Phillies, as well as the extremely prophetic 1989 World Series earthquake, and countless related things, are a most important prophecy that is predicting that Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash that will be caused due to a bird strike in St. Louis on precisely November 26th, 2022. The date that this video is posted proves that this prediction was made ahead of time, as does this timestamped email and forensic notes PDF. If you are skeptical, please email me and I will forward these to you. After Harris's death, she will be replaced by Michelle Obama, and soon after, Barack Obama will replace Michelle. This is the reason why Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash. This video is also predicting that Michelle Obama will become the 47th president on December 13th, 2022. She will become the Queen of America 96 days after the Queen of England died at the age of 96. She will return to the White House as the president 97 days after she returned to the White House for the unveiling of her portrait on the date September 7th, which is 9/7 and hints at 97. She will replace the 49th U.S. Vice President and then become the president exactly 49 months after her book Becoming was released. She will become the first female president and the 47th president exactly 47 weeks after the death of Lucia Harris, the queen of basketball, who was the first and only woman to be drafted by the NBA, and she will replace Kamala Harris, and her husband is the basketball president, who will replace Michelle Obama a few days later as the president on December 18th. Here is the email and forensic notes PDF that document this prediction. This video is also predicting that famous actor James Earl Jones, the voice of the Lion King and the voice of Darth Vader, will die on December 30th, 2022. This video is also predicting that there will be a catastrophic asteroid hit on Earth on September 2nd, 2023. This will be a fulfillment of what is described in the book of Revelation in the Bible in chapter 8. Currently at this time, there is no way of knowing where Kamala Harris plans to be on November 26th. But if her plane crash occurs in St. Louis, then another video on this channel that is titled Prediction Harris's Plane Will Crash in St. Louis on November 26th will become one of the most important videos on this channel. In the description box below, I will leave a link to this absolute must-watch video. It has been known since the autumn of 2020 that she will die in a plane crash. But as can be seen here in this email, it was known since August of 2021 that God was pointing to the date January 14th, 2022 in regards to Harris's death in a plane crash. The majority of this video was produced before January 14th, 2022. Prior to January 14th, 2022, the Lord was pointing to this date with an overwhelming amount of evidence through connections to other signs that involved symbolism for the death of Kamala Harris in a plane crash, which is why prior to January 14th, 2022, it was assumed that this would be the day that Kamala Harris would die in a plane crash due to a bird strike. However, instead, it turned out that January 14th, 2022 was a day of prophetic signs that confirmed all of the analysis of the signs and connections that were pointing to January 14th in regards to the death of Kamala Harris in a plane crash. It turned out that January 14th was another important step in the trail of signs that is ultimately leading to the day that Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash. Prior to January 14th, 2022, I had learned that God was also pointing to June 7th. One reason being is that it is 144 days after January 14th. I knew that if January 14th were not to be the day that Harris would die in a plane crash, then it would be expected that there would be a prophetic sign involving the number 144 on January 14th. Sure enough, we received an amazing prophetic sign involving the number 144 on January 14th, as was expected in advance. This prophetic sign involved 144 horses. The explanation of this prophetic sign, other signs that occurred on January 14th, and many, many other extremely profound things are explained in the must-watch American Pharaoh prophecy video. The American Pharaoh prophecy video is essential information, especially regarding the prediction for Kamala Harris's death in a plane crash. I either recommend pausing this video here and watching the American Pharaoh prophecy video first and then return to this video, or watch the American Pharaoh prophecy video after you have watched this video. In the description box below this video, I will leave a link to the American Pharaoh prophecy video. The number 144 is prophetic because of the prophetic number 144,000 in the book of Revelation in the Bible. The prophetic sign on January 14th involving 144 horses confirmed adding 144 days to reach June 7th, and the relevant prophetic signs that occurred on that day, including an announcement from Kamala Harris, the 49th Vice President, regarding America's border wall of security. In the book of Joshua in the Bible, the Hebrews marched around the walls of security of the ancient city of Jericho for 7 days before they collapsed in God's judgment. On the 7th day, right before the walls collapsed, 7 Hebrew priests blew 7 trumpets that were made from horns of bighorn sheep. This is symbolism for 7 times 7 equals 49. June 7th was the 7th day after park rangers at Joshua Tree National Park closed its 49 Palms hiking trail in order to provide bighorn sheep access to water. The hiking trail is symbolism for the Hebrews' march around Jericho, and June 7th was the 7th day of its closure, which symbolized the 7 days that the Hebrews marched around Jericho in the book of Joshua. And then on the 7th day blew trumpets, which were made out of bighorn sheep horns. This trail, named 49 Palms, is near Los Angeles, the hometown of Kamala Harris, the 49th Vice President. The January 6 public hearings prophecy video will explain the most profound story that God is telling through the prophetic signs that occurred on June 7th, and also through the extremely important January 6 committee hearings. 7 times 7 days, which is 49 days, after June 7th was the day of the closure of the I-70 highway and 70 rescues by firefighters in the extremely prophetic, historic, and destructive flooding in St. Louis that pointed to the 70-mile-wide path of totality of the Great American Eclipse that passed over St. Louis and peaked right near St. Louis and ran parallel with the I-70 highway. This flooding in St. Louis on July 26th is in turn 100 days, which is the equivalent of 144,000 minutes before the prophetic signs that occurred on November 3rd that revealed that Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash in St. Louis on November 26th. The reason the number 144,000 is prophetic is because of the description in the book of Revelation involving 12 times 12,000. On the same day as the prophetic flooding in St. Louis, a sudden windstorm caused Class A damage, meaning 2.5 million or more in damages, to several Navy helicopters at a base in Virginia. The prophetic significance of these helicopters is explained in the must-watch NASA Mars helicopter videos on this channel. A main aspect of the news story on this incident states that the National Weather Service issued a severe thunderstorm alert at 3:30 p.m., with a warning of winds of more than 60 miles per hour. According to the damage assessment, the high winds hit the Navy base at 3:42 p.m., 12 minutes after the initial warning. When given enough time, aircraft in the path of bad weather are taken into their hangars or tied down. However, the storm came at a time when aviation maintainers are usually in the midst of a shift change. Most of the personnel were indoors and had limited time to bring the aircraft in the hangars. In other words, the timing of the storm couldn't have been worse, and this 12 minutes warning was key. This prophetic 12 minutes warning is why this incident is a warning from God that 12 times 12,000 minutes after this 12 minutes warning was the day of the amazing and profound and extremely important prophetic signs that occurred on the penultimate date in the Trail of Signs on November 3rd that revealed that Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash in St. Louis on November 26th. The city of St. Louis is symbolism for the eclipse that passed over it, and the number 33 symbolizes the eclipse, as the path of totality of the eclipse entered the U.S. through the 33rd state and exited the U.S. on the 33rd parallel, 33 days before the great sign in heaven that is described in Revelation chapter 12 was fulfilled in the night sky. This is the reason for this connection between the flooding in St. Louis and the date November 3rd, which is 11-3, which hints at 11 times 3 equals 33. It is predicted that NASA's Artemis 1 will explode and crash. Late on November 3rd, NASA began its 9-hour rollout of its Artemis 1 onto the launch pad. It posted a tweet that referenced Billy Joel. Billy Joel won 6 Grammy Awards. The 2022 World Series MVP, Houston Astros shortstop Jeremy Pena, only hit 6 home runs in a season in college, but on November 3rd, he hit his 4th home run of the postseason in the 4th inning of a World Series game. He was the first ever rookie shortstop to hit a home run in the World Series, and this 4th home run in the 4th inning by the player from Houston, which is Harris County, was symbolism for how through the death of Kamala Harris in a plane crash, the 44th president will become the president again. Pena hit 6 home runs in college while playing for the University of Maine. Maine was the 23rd state to join the Union. His 4th home run in the postseason that was hit in the 4th inning pointed to how he only hit 6 home runs while playing for the university named after the 23rd state, because God pairs 23 and 44 together to point to the 44th president, the basketball president, that wore jersey number 23 in high school. This 4th home run in the 4th inning on November 3rd hinted at adding 23 days to reveal the date that Harris will die in a plane crash, November 26th. On November 3rd, NASA began rolling out its Artemis 1 after previous launch attempts were canceled due to the issues with its RS-25 engines. And on this same day, the 25-year-old rookie shortstop playing for the team from Harris County hit his home run because Obama will become the president again through the death of Harris and the use of the 25th Amendment. Also on November 3rd, Joe Biden issued a tweet that mentioned how 205 Republicans voted against providing mental health care services in schools. 205 hints at 25, and this was because Joe Biden will step down due to his mental health and use the 25th Amendment to replace himself with Michelle and Barack Obama. With this game, Pena, player number 3, had 18 postseason hits. 19 days earlier was Game 3 between the teams from Harris County and the team from Washington State, and was the longest game ever at 18 innings. Because the game was scoreless until the 18th inning, because the teams went for a combined 0 hits in 19 opportunities with runners in scoring position. This 0 for 19 in 18 innings in Game 3 confirmed the 19 days count to player number 3's 18 hits. The reason for 18 hits, 18 innings, and Harris County and Washington State is because the number 18 is 6 plus 6 plus 6, which in Bible prophecy is Antichrist symbolism, and the number 61 is the 18th prime number, and the Antichrist was born in 1961 and will become the president again and the Antichrist at the age of 61 in Washington, D.C., after Harris's death. This Game 3 was finally won in the 18th inning when player number 3, Jeremy Pena, hit a home run off the pitcher named Penn Murphy, and the home run sailed over the center field fence into an area of the stadium that is nicknamed the Pen. This is 3 hints at the name Pena, and the 2 reasons for this is that the Antichrist will serve a 3rd presidential term, and because the name Pena comes from the word in Spanish that means rock. In the Bible, rock is symbolism for Jesus Christ. The reason why God pointed to Pena's college baseball in Maine is because in the prestigious Cape Cod Summer League, Pena played for the Plymouth Pilgrims. The big coincidence regarding the Pilgrims in the year 1620 is that they purchased their land deed from a company named Plymouth. They were twice forced to return to Plymouth, England for boat repairs, and under desperate conditions, they selected a piece of land that had already been named Plymouth before their arrival by a cartographer. This is 3 Plymouths, and Jeremy Pena wears jersey number 3, and he played for the Plymouth Pilgrims. And the name Pena means rock because God is pointing to the spiritual founding of America with the Pilgrims on Plymouth Rock. The land named Plymouth had already been cleared by the native Indians, but had been vacated right before the Pilgrims arrived because 90% of the native population had been wiped out due to a plague. Had this not been the case, the natives would have been hostile and the Pilgrims would not have survived. The Pilgrims were escaping political and religious persecution, and the spiritual beginning of America was founded in a plague that was a blessing. And America will now end in destruction with the curse of the Antichrist, who will use a plague to persecute God's people. The date Pena hit his 4th postseason home run in the 4th inning was November 3rd, which is 11-3. After that game, player 3, Jeremy Pena, had scored 11 runs in the postseason, which hinted at 11-3. After this game, his postseason batting average was .333, and the date 11-3 hints at 11 times 3 equals 33. On this same day, NASA made a reference to Billy Joel, who in his career had 33 songs that made it into the top 40 hits chart. Joel had 3 songs make it to number 1. 33 divided by 3 is 11, and the date of this Joel sign is 11-3. Player 3 hit his prophetic home run on the day NASA referenced Billy Joel, who had 33 top 40 hits, and this was 33 years after the extremely prophetic 1989 World Series earthquake that occurred at the beginning of Game 3. The power went out in the broadcast booth right as player 33 was crossing the home plate, which was right after the ball was hit off of the outfield wall next to the 330-foot sign marker. Pictures on the pitching mound symbolize the Antichrist on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem in Bible prophecy, and this was exactly 333 months before the extremely prophetic sign on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem that was symbolism for the beginning of the end times period of the Antichrist. But this is explained in other videos. NASA tweeted a reference to Billy Joel on the 3rd of November, the date 11/3, which hints at 11 times 3 equals 33, and Billy Joel had 33 top 40 songs, 3 of which made it to number 1 on the chart, and this was 33 years after the World Series earthquake at the beginning of Game 3. Billy Joel's album, Stormfront, was released on the same day as the Game 3 earthquake. And this album includes his 3rd song to make it to number 1 on the chart. The song, We Didn't Start the Fire. The 1989 World Series earthquake was known for the fires it started in San Francisco. The song is known for its fast-paced lyrics that include brief references to 118 significant political, cultural, scientific, and sporting events between 1949, the year of Billy Joel's birth, and 1989, in a mainly chronological order. God uses the number 23 to point to the only president to serve non-consecutive terms. President Grover Cleveland was the 22nd president, and he skipped the 23rd presidency and was the 24th president. He skipped the presidency of Benjamin Harrison. Just like how the basketball president that wore jersey number 23 will also serve non-consecutive terms after he replaces Kamala Harris. God uses the number 23 to point to the number 22. The number 22 is symbolism for the mark of the Antichrist that Bible prophecy says will be used to persecute God's people. Bible prophecy says that if one takes this mark of the Antichrist, they will go to hell, but if they don't take it, they won't be able to buy or sell or participate in the economy. If one refuses to take the mark of the Antichrist, they will not be able to purchase the food that will be rationed. The number 23 symbolizes the identity of the Antichrist, and the number 22 symbolizes the mark of the Antichrist. The inverse of the mark of the Antichrist that is described in the book of Ezekiel in chapter 9 would have been the Tav mark. The Tav is the 22nd letter in the Hebrew alphabet, and it is the last letter in the Hebrew alphabet. And the mark of the Antichrist is described in the last book of the Bible, the 22nd book out of 22 books that have a total of 22 chapters. The reason why God connected the 2022 World Series, Jeremy Pena's prophetic hits, his time playing for the university named after the 23rd state, NASA's tweet that referenced Billy Joel, who is known for his pop music hits and was nominated for 23 Grammy Awards, to the 1989 World Series earthquake that was on the same day that Billy Joel's album and hit song, We Didn't Start the Fire, was released, was in order to point to the 22nd event that is listed in Billy Joel's song. All of this was to point to this 22nd event that was listed in the song, We Didn't Start the Fire. There are 118 events listed in this song because it equals 117 events plus this one event. And this is because the Antichrist will use this one event, the 22nd event listed in the song, to persecute God's people after becoming the president again during the 117th Congress. The Antichrist will come to power and become the president again in the 117th Congress, and then in the 118th Congress, which will begin in January 2023, will persecute God's people with the 22nd event that is listed in this song. The date of the 1989 World Series earthquake, which was the same day that Billy Joel's Stormfront album was released that included the song We Didn't Start the Fire, was October 17th, 1017, which hints at 117. One reason why God connected the release date of Billy Joel's album, Stormfront, which contains this 22nd event that is the mark of the Antichrist, to the same date as the 1989 World Series earthquake, is because the 1989 World Series was won by the 1989 Oakland Athletics, which was the team that is widely considered to be the steroid team. The 1989 Oakland baseball team is the team that symbolizes cheating through taking steroids. And this taking steroids is symbolism for taking the mark of the Antichrist. The game-winning home run hit by player 3, Jeremy Pena, in the longest ever game that went 18 innings was in Game 3 of the series, and this game tied the longest ever World Series game that also went 18 innings in 2018, which was also in Game 3 and was also won by a dramatic game-winning home run to end the game. That Game 3 of the 2018 World Series was 29 years after the 1989 World Series earthquake that occurred at the beginning of Game 3. This was because, according to the book of Luke in the Bible, Jesus began the age of fishing for men in 29 AD with 13 men, him plus 12 disciples. Jesus' last miracle involved 153 fish that were caught, and this was symbolism for the end of the age of fishing for men. 13 times 153 equals 1989, which is symbolism for the duration of the age of fishing for men, and 29 AD plus 1989 years equals 2018. And this was in order to symbolize the end of the age of fishing for men. 29 AD plus 1989 years equals the year 2018, and this symbolizes the 1989 World Series earthquake plus 29 years equals 2018. This was the purpose of the many prophetic signs in the 2018 World Series that pointed to the prophetic 1989 World Series earthquake. For example, both Game 1 and Game 2 of the 2018 World Series began with prophetic stunning double rainbows over Fenway Park. This pointed to how Game 1 began with famous singer James Taylor singing the national anthem at the beginning of Game 1 to begin the World Series. The ABC broadcast of the World Series in 1989 began with the entire song by James Taylor, "Hello, Old Friend." A couple of minutes later, the earthquake struck and the power went out in the broadcast booth, which is why in Game 2 of the 2018 World Series, the power went out in the Red Sox radio broadcast booth during the very 7 minutes that the Red Sox staged their pivotal game-winning rally. The rainbow is Noah's flood symbolism, and this 7 minutes symbolized the 7 days warning that God gave Noah to load the ark before the flood judgment began. This is why 7 days after the double rainbow at the beginning of Game 2 and the 7 minutes power outage was the day of the Duck Boat Victory Parade in Boston that went into the Charles River. Duck boats look like little arks, and the parade of duck boats in the Charles River was symbolism for the spiritual founding of America with the Boston colony and John Winthrop's flotilla of ships that went up the Charles River. Duck boats symbolize the ark that rescued Noah and his family from the judgment destruction. In Bible prophecy, the number 144,000 symbolizes the rescue, rapture, and resurrection of God's faithful from the coming persecution of the Antichrist. This is why the Duck Boat Victory Parade was 7 days after the sign involving 7 minutes, and also why it was 144,000 minutes, which is the equivalent of 100 days. After the duck boat was raised and resurrected from the bottom of Table Rock Lake in Missouri. In the Bible, rock symbolizes Jesus, and the duck boat was raised and resurrected from the bottom of Table Rock Lake in the early morning, 3.5 days after it sank just before sunset, which pointed to the resurrection of Jesus Christ in the early morning, 3.5 days after his death and burial just before sunset. In the duck boat tragedy, 17 people drowned, 9 of which were from the same family. 9 times 17 equals 153. Table Rock Lake in Missouri just happens to have almost the exact same water volume and exact same surface area as the Galilee Lake in Israel, on which the disciples caught 153 fish in their net. God pairs the numbers 9 and 23 together in order to confirm the signs and connections, and to point to the basketball president that wore jersey number 23 and became the president in 2009. Another prophetic sign we received on November 3rd, the former Prime Minister of Pakistan was shot, and the news story was about how the shooter with his 9mm pistol was stopped. The shooting took place in the countryside, and the political leader was rushed to a hospital in Lahore, Pakistan, because this pointed to Kamala Harris, who is of South Asian descent, and who is widely speculated as getting her big start in politics by being a whore and sleeping with former San Francisco Mayor Willie Brown. This 9mm pistol, on the day of NASA's 9-hour rollout of its Artemis 1, pairs with adding 23 days to reveal that Harris will die in a plane crash on November 26th. Also, Jeremy Pena moved from the Dominican Republic to New England at the age of 9 years old, and then played for the university named after the 23rd state, which is in New England, and he hit his prophetic home run that pointed to his 6 home runs that he hit in college 23 days before it is predicted that Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash, which will lead to the rise of the 44th president again, and his prophetic home run was the 4th in the postseason, and it was hit in the 4th inning. Also, at the time that NASA began its 9-hour rollout of Artemis 1, it made a reference to Billy Joel, who was nominated for 23 Grammy Awards, which also hints at adding 23 days to the day of the 9-hour rollout to reveal the day that Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash. Also, Billy Joel had 33 songs to make it to the top 40 hits chart, and he was nominated for 23 Grammy Awards. And when NASA began its 9-hour rollout of its Artemis 1, it made a reference to Billy Joel, and 33 years prior to this was the day Joel's album Stormfront was released, which includes the song We Didn't Start the Fire, and God is pointing to the 22nd event listed in the song, and he uses the number 23 to point to the number 22. In other words, the 9-hour rollout pairs with the 23 Grammys and the 22nd event in the song in order to confirm the signs and connections. Pictures on the pitching mound symbolize the Antichrist on the Temple Mount in Bible prophecy. The prophetic baseball game on November 3rd was Game 5. Houston won the game with a score of 3-2 to lead the series 3-2, which served to highlight further the significance of the number 5. What confirmed even further this 3-2 score in the game and the 3-2 score in the series was that the last game of the regular season that these two teams played was against each other, and the final score was 3-2 for Houston. But not only that, these two teams are not supposed to play each other in the regular season because they each play in the different leagues. It is very, very rare for a particular National League team to play a particular American League team in the regular season. The team from Harris County brought in their ace closing pitcher, player number 55, to pitch the last 5 outs of game number 5. His name is Ryan Presley. Ryan in Irish means king, and the I-55 highway goes down from Chicago to Memphis, Tennessee, where the estate of the king of rock and roll, Elvis Presley, is located. The Antichrist is from Chicago, and Memphis, Tennessee is named after Memphis, Egypt. In the Bible, Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, is symbolism for the Antichrist king. The 31st chapter of the book of Isaiah describes the Antichrist, and it begins with, "Woe to those who go down to Egypt," which is exactly what Barack Obama did as his first major thing after becoming the president, when he went down to Cairo, Egypt, in order to tell the Muslim world that America is no longer a Christian nation. One reason for Game 5 and Ryan Presley, pitcher number 55, is that on the I-55 between Chicago and Memphis is St. Louis, which is where Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash 23 days after this game that was closed by pitcher number 55, Ryan Presley. The symbolic and prophetic last out that was pitched by this pitcher in this game was player number 8 for Philadelphia. This was on a Thursday, and there happened to be one nationally televised football game on this same day, which was coincidentally also between Houston and Philadelphia. Philadelphia won this football game and went to a record of 8-0 on the season for the first time in their history, and on the day that the last out was player number 8 for Philadelphia. In the Bible, goat is Antichrist symbolism. The undisputed GOAT, greatest of all time of football punting, wore jersey number 44 in college, which identified the GOAT Antichrist, the 44th president. And also on this same day, the GOAT, greatest of all time of football punting, Raiders player number 8, died. This is 3 8s. Roman letters are also numerals, and likewise Greek letters are also numerals. The numeric value of the name Jesus in the Greek New Testament is 888. This points to the Church of Philadelphia in the Bible, which Jesus said would be the only church that would be raptured and spared the tribulation period of the Antichrist. All of the signs on November 3rd ultimately point to this last symbolic out that was player 8 for Philadelphia, which was on the same day that the GOAT of punting, player 8, died, and was the day that the Philadelphia Eagles went to a record of 8-0. The big reason for this is player 8's name. His name is Nick Castellanos. This is one of numerous men named Nick, including, for example, Philadelphia Eagles quarterback Nick Foles, that God has used to identify the Nicolaitans and the Nicolaitan doctrine of our day, which is the evangelical church and its doctrine. God uses the city of Philadelphia in his signs in order to contrast with the church of Laodicea in the Bible. The church that Jesus said is unaware that it is not in good standing and thinks it is in need of nothing. This church of Laodicea is the American church, and specifically the evangelical church, that God is warning that he is extremely displeased with. The spiritually lazy, complacent, do-nothing church. The church that does not have the spiritual eyes to see what is going on, which is why Jesus told this church it needs salve ointment for their eyes. The root of this bad tree that is producing no fruit and rotten fruit is its theology, its doctrine, which is sovereign grace and free grace, which come in the packages of Calvinism and dispensationalism, and both lead to the Gnostic and heretical doctrine of once saved, always saved. And to come to the conclusion of this doctrine requires ignoring countless passages in the Bible and twisting the meaning of many others. This theology and doctrine is the Nicolaitan doctrine of our day, that Jesus said he hates and is coming to make war with the sword of his mouth on those that teach and have the works that are a product of this doctrine. This Nicolaitan doctrine and theology is Reformed theology. It is the myth of imputed righteousness, as understood by evangelicals. It is once saved, always saved. It is saved by faith alone. It is the doctrine of the predestination of the elect. It is the misuse of the verse in the Old Testament that says our righteousness is as filthy rags. It is monergism. It is the God's satisfaction model of the atonement. It is all Christians will be raptured. It is the separation of discipleship from salvation, etc. And make no mistake, the reason why God has given me a voice through this prediction is to prove this. It is to prove that this is God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections, which is overwhelmingly demonstrating what I have just said. To not appreciate this is to miss entirely the purpose of God giving this prediction. Make sure you watch the most important 23 church signs video on this channel. What further confirms this is the symbolic last and prophetic out of the final game of the 2022 World Series, which was again pitched by the pitcher on the pitching mound, player number 55, Ryan Presley, on the date 11-5, which hints at 11 times 5 equals 55, when the team from Harris County won, a team known for cheating. The last out in this game was again Philadelphia player number 8, Nick Castellanos. It was a high fly ball deep in foul ball territory, caught by player number 30. In the Bible, the number 30 is symbolism for a king, and therefore also Antichrist king symbolism. And this high fly ball in foul ball territory was symbolism for the foul way in which the Antichrist will become the president again through Harris's death, and it was symbolism for how Harris will die due to a bird strike, the bird fowl that will strike her plane. In St. Louis, which is connected to Chicago with the I-55 highway, which is why the pitcher on the pitching mound, which is symbolism for the Antichrist on the Temple Mount, was player number 55 on this date 11-5, which hints at 55. Pitchers on the pitching mound symbolize the Antichrist on the Temple Mount in Bible prophecy. Pitcher number 55 pitched the symbolic and prophetic last out of the World Series on the date 11-5, which hints at 11 times 5 equals 55, and this last pitch is 55 days before the date it is predicted that famous actor James Earl Jones will die. Ryan Presley, player 55, hints at Memphis, Tennessee, and Pharaoh in Egypt, which is Antichrist king symbolism. Memphis is connected to Chicago, the hometown of the Antichrist, with the I-55 highway. The estate of the king of rock and roll, Elvis Presley, is in Memphis, which is near where Elvis was born, and also near where James Earl Jones was born. James Earl Jones is king symbolism. He was the voice of the Lion King. He was the voice of Darth Vader, which is Antichrist king symbolism. He played a dying and dead king in Coming to America. And James Earl Jones read the audio King James Bible. James Earl Jones was born 7 years and 77 days before the 7th Commissioner of Baseball was born. The 7th Commissioner of Baseball is symbolism for the 1st Commissioner of Baseball, who, in a time of crisis and emergency, was given unchecked power over every person in baseball after the 1919 Chicago Black Sox World Series cheating scandal, which is symbolism for the Antichrist who is from Chicago and became president through cheating regarding where he was born, and the unchecked power that he will be given over every person in a time of crisis and emergency. The 7th Commissioner of Baseball, Bartlett Giamatti, died exactly 5 months after being in office in September of 1989, right before the World Series earthquake. As will Kamala Harris die while in office, which will lead to the return of the Antichrist to the White House, which is why Kamala Harris went down to Guatemala to investigate the supposed source of the border wall of security crisis and visited President Giamatti 5 months after she had been in office. And this is why at this time she had to make an emergency return landing to Washington, D.C. due to a plane malfunction, and also at this time a swarm of cicadas flew into the engine of the White House press corps plane at the time that a cicada landed on Joe Biden as he was boarding his plane. which communicated that Kamala Harris will die due to a bird strike to the engine of her Air Force Two plane. James Earl Jones read the 7th Commissioner of Baseball's prophetic poem about baseball being a homecoming at the beginning of the Game 3 broadcast in 1989, 4 minutes before the earthquake hit as player 33 was crossing home plate, which was symbolism for the second coming of Lord Jesus Christ.
Baseball is about homecoming. It is a journey by theft and strength, guile and speed, out around first to the far island of second, where foes lurk in the rees and the green sea suddenly grows deeper. Then it turns sharply, skimming the shallows, making for a shore that will show a friendly face, a color, a familiar language, and at third to proceed no longer by paths indirect, but straight to home.
James Earl Jones also starred in the most iconic baseball movie ever made, Field of Dreams, which was also released in 1989. And ultimately, God is using James Earl Jones to point to Jones's iconic speech in this movie, which is about how America could be great again, which is the symbolic reason for Trump's Make America Great Again speeches. These speeches are God trumpeting judgment warning. There are 7 trumpet judgments in the book of Revelation that describe the events that will happen within the next 2 years, and this is the reason for the connections to the 7th Commissioner of Baseball and James Earl Jones and President Trump, as Trump in archaic English means trumpet or the sounding of a trumpet. And this is the reason for Kamala Harris's trip to investigate the supposed border wall of security crisis, the true source being America's relationship with God, because President Trump's presidency was synonymous with his border wall of security, because the Hebrews marched around Jericho before the walls of security collapsed in God's judgment after they blew trumpets. And archaeology proves that the walls of security of the ancient city of Jericho collapsed due to an earthquake, and this is the reason for the connection to the prophetic 1989 World Series earthquake. And this is the reason for these connections to James Earl Jones, who is tied to baseball and is predicted to die 55 days after player 55, Ryan Presley, who on the date 11-5, which hints at 55, pitched the last out of the World Series, an out that was caught by player number 30, and 30 is symbolism for a king, and James Earl Jones will die on the 30th day of the month, and James Earl Jones is king symbolism. God pairs 23 and 44 together to point to the 44th president, the basketball president that wore jersey number 23. This is why God uses connections of 23 weeks, which is almost exactly 44% of a year. In the movie Field of Dreams, Ray Liotta played one of the Chicago Black Sox 1919 World Series cheaters. Liotta's character delivers the iconic line of the movie, "If you build it, he will come," which is symbolism for rebuilding the temple in Jerusalem and the second coming of Lord Jesus Christ. Pictures on the pitching mound symbolize the Antichrist on the Temple Mount in Bible prophecy, and Liotta died exactly 23 weeks before the prophetic signs in the World Series game involving pitcher number 55 on the pitching mound, which in turn points to the death of Liotta's co-star, James Earl Jones, 55 days after pitcher 55 pitched the symbolic last out on the date 11-5, which hints at 55. Ray Liotta died exactly 23 weeks, which is 44% of a year, before the prophetic home run hit by Jeremy Pena, his 4th home run of the postseason in the 4th inning, which pointed to his home runs that he hit while playing for the university named after the 23rd state. And Liotta died exactly 23 weeks before NASA's Billy Joel tweet, and Joel was nominated for 23 Grammys, and Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash 23 days after NASA's tweet. Ray Liotta and James Earl Jones starred in Field of Dreams, which was released in 1989, the same year of the 1989 World Series earthquake, and Ray Liotta died and James Earl Jones will die 33 years after 1989 and the World Series earthquake, when the power in the broadcast booth went out after James Earl Jones had read the poem about baseball, and right as player number 33 crossed home plate, right after the ball hit off of the wall at the 330 feet marker, because God was communicating that the Antichrist would rise to power 33 years after 1989. James Earl Jones is king symbolism, and the King of Kings, Jesus Christ, was born in 2 BC and died in 32 AD at the age of 33. The duration of the age of fishing for men is a symbolic 1989 years, which is why Ray Liotta and James Earl Jones will die 33 years after 1989. After Jones read the baseball poem, sports announcer Al Michaels mentioned how the San Francisco Giants were down 2-0, but that in recent times there were 2 instances in which teams that were down 2-0 came back to win. This was in 1985 and 1986. This was 2 World Series in a row in which 2 teams were down 2-0, but then came back to win. The purpose of this was to hint at the second coming of Lord Jesus Christ, the second presidency for the Antichrist, and to hint at the number 22, which is symbolism for the mark of the Antichrist. And again, the day that Al Michaels said this was the day of the World Series earthquake and the day that Billy Joel released his Stormfront album, which contains the song We Didn't Start the Fire, in which God has pointed to the 22nd event in order to identify what the mark of the Antichrist is. The 1985 World Series was between the 2 teams from the state of Missouri, Kansas City and St. Louis, and was called the Battle of the I-70 Highway, and God used this to point to the 70-mile-wide path of totality of the Great American Solar Eclipse in 2017 that traversed across America and across Missouri parallel to the I-70 Highway, and it is predicted that Kamala Harris's plane will crash near the airport in St. Louis, and the airport is right next to the I-70 Highway. And this coincidence of the 2 teams from Missouri in the Battle of the I-70 Highway is similar to the coincidence in the 1989 World Series in what was called the Battle of the Bay between the 2 teams from the San Francisco Bay Area, San Francisco and Oakland, the 2 cities that connect to each other with the Bay Bridge, the Bay Bridge that had a segment that collapsed due to the earthquake, which was symbolism for the disconnection from the bridge between man and God, the cross, Jesus Christ, which is why the 6.9 magnitude earthquake was centered 10 miles outside of Santa Cruz, California, in the Santa Cruz Mountains, as Santa Cruz is Spanish for Holy Cross. After being down 2-0, the Kansas City Royals came back to beat St. Louis and win the 1985 World Series. It was their first of 2 World Series wins. Their second World Series win came exactly 30 years later in 2015. In the Bible, a 30 years period is symbolism for a king, as Joseph and David were made kings at the age of 30 years old, which is why the team named Royals won 2 World Series exactly 30 years apart. After Jesus officially entered Jerusalem as the King of the Jews, on the Hebrew calendar date Nisan 10, he cleansed the royal portico area of the Temple Mount of the money exchangers and of corruption. In Bible prophecy, a period of 1,260 days is symbolism for the period of the Antichrist's rule, and exactly 1,260 days after the Royals won their second World Series in 2015 was Nisan 10 in the Hebrew calendar, and was the day of the 9-hour roof fire at the Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris that is known for its facade of kings. and the crown of thorns. And from the Bible and God's true big picture of signs, which is only being explained on this channel, the number 9 symbolizes God's judgment. And the day of the fire on the royal portico area of the Temple Mount. All of this was symbolism for the return of the King of Kings, Jesus Christ, to cleanse his church through the tribulation and testing of faith through the Antichrist king that will be on the Temple Mount in the end times. The 1985 Kansas City Royals came back from being behind 2-0 to St. Louis in the World Series, and then went on to win their first of 2 prophetic World Series. In 1985 and in 2015, to get to the World Series, the Kansas City Royals coincidentally beat the Toronto Blue Jays in 1985 and in 2015 in the American League Championship Series. In the 1985 American League Championship Series, the Kansas City Royals were also down 2-0. 2 series in a row of being down 2-0 also hinted at the number 22. Which is symbolism for the mark of the Antichrist. Incidentally, this isn't the only parallel between 1985 and 2015 that includes baseball. For comedy, the writers of the movie Back to the Future predicted that in 2015, the Chicago Cubs would win the World Series. They actually won the next year in 2016 and broke their supposed curse of the Billy Goat, which is Antichrist symbolism. The 2 years in which Marty time travels to in the movie Back to the Future and in the movie Back to the Future Part 2 are 1985 and 2015. The 2 years that the Kansas City Royals beat the Toronto Blue Jays and then won the World Series. The plot of the movie Back to the Future is about how Marty is trying to give Doc a prophecy about the future, about a terrorism event, and other videos explain how this was a prophecy from God that was predicting 9/11. And one reason why God is pointing to the year 1985, the year of the movie Back to the Future, and the 1985 World Series, when the Royals beat the Blue Jays and then beat the St. Louis Cardinals, which are birds, is that it is 37 years before the 2022 World Series, when Jeremy Pena hit his 4th home run of the postseason in the 4th inning, and the big game-winning home run that won the World Series for the team from Harris County was hit by player number 44. This is because 37 years is 444 months, and the 44th president will now become the president again, and the Antichrist king, symbolized by the Royals, after the death of Harris in a plane crash by a bird strike in St. Louis, which is why the Kansas City Royals beat the Blue Jays and the St. Louis Cardinals, 2 teams that are birds, 444 months ago. Pitchers on the pitching mound symbolize the Antichrist on the Temple Mount in Bible prophecy, and the MVP for the Royals in the 1985 World Series was the pitcher that wore jersey number 18 and number 31 for the Royals. 18 plus 31 is 49, and the Antichrist king will become president again after the 49th U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash in St. Louis, which is why this pitcher beat the team from St. Louis. Pitchers on the pitching mound symbolize the Antichrist on the Temple Mount in Bible prophecy, and pitcher number 18 identified the Antichrist that will be defeated on the Temple Mount at the second coming of Lord Jesus Christ in 2024. As in 1985, Barack Obama was 24 years old, and 18 is 6 plus 6 plus 6, which is symbolism for the Antichrist, and the 18th prime number is 61, and the Antichrist was born in 1961 and will become the president again and the Antichrist at the age of 61. In Bible prophecy, the period of the Antichrist's rule is symbolized by 7 years, and 7 years after the Royals beat the St. Louis Cardinals in the 1985 World Series, the Toronto Blue Jays won their first of 2 World Series in a row. The St. Louis Cardinals and the Blue Jays are birds. This is because the Antichrist will rise to power through the death of Kamala Harris in a plane crash in St. Louis that will be caused by a bird strike. 18 years, which is 6 plus 6 plus 6 years, and is also 6 times 6 times 6 months, after the Blue Jays won their second World Series in a row, the St. Louis Cardinals won their 11th World Series in 2011. This second connection between World Series involving the Cardinals and the Blue Jays pointed to a plane crash caused by a bird strike in St. Louis that will lead to the Antichrist. The 2011 World Series was known for a game in which St. Louis was down by 2 runs and 1 strike remaining in the 9th inning. In other words, they had 2 outs and 2 strikes, and then scoring 2 runs to tie the game, and then the exact same scenario repeated in the 10th inning. Again, down by 2 runs, with 2 outs and 2 strikes, they again scored 2 runs to tie the game. The Antichrist Barack Obama talked about this scenario when the Cardinals visited him at the White House. And these 2s were symbolism for the second presidency for the Antichrist. In the Bible, the number 11 appears in context of the execution of God's judgment. The game was won in the 11th inning with a home run by player number 23, which hints at the basketball president that wore jersey number 23. This 11th inning home run in St. Louis's 11th World Series win in 2011 is 11 years before Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash due to a bird strike in St. Louis in 2022. And the repetition of being down by 2 runs in 2 innings in a row confirmed that St. Louis is symbolism for the paths of the 2 eclipses and the mark of the Antichrist, as the number 22 is symbolism for the mark of the Antichrist, which is symbolized by the Tav mark, the 22nd letter in the Hebrew alphabet, and the 2 paths of the 2 eclipses engender a Tav mark. Right before the 1989 World Series earthquake, Al Michaels mentioned the 2 World Series in a row, 1985 and 1986, in which the 2 teams that won had been down 2-0. The 2 teams that lost those 2 World Series played each other in 2 prophetic World Series. St. Louis and Boston played each other in the 2004 World Series, and then again 9 years later in the 2013 World Series. From the Bible and in God's big picture of signs, which is only being explained on this channel, the number 9 is symbolism for God's judgment, which is why he uses 9 years connections. Also, this 9 years connection to the 2013 World Series hints at 9 times 13 equals 117, which is the number God uses to point to the 117th Congress, during which the Antichrist will rise to power, and the number 13 is symbolism for the Antichrist, as in the Bible, Nimrod, a type for the Antichrist, was the 13th generation from Ham. Haman, another type for the Antichrist, persecuted the Jews on the 2 13th days of the months, and the 2 Antichrists are described in the book of Revelation in chapter 13. Hence, 9 times 13 is symbolism for judgment by the Antichrist on the nation that was originally made up of 13 colonies. Hence this 9 years connection between these 2 World Series between St. Louis and Boston and the World Series in 2013. The first 2 World Series that Boston won since the Curse of the Bambino, which is symbolism for the curse of the Antichrist. In 2004, Boston finally broke their supposed Curse of the Bambino and won the World Series in St. Louis. During this game was the only ever blood moon lunar eclipse to be seen by fans in the stadium of a World Series game. The blood moon rose above the famous St. Louis Gateway Arch, also seen from the stadium. Another main reason for these signs in St. Louis is because St. Louis is known as the Gateway to the West, and because of the Gateway Arch that commemorates the Lewis and Clark expedition. In the Bible, God's judgment on a people symbolically begins at the gates, which is why Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash near the Gateway Arch in St. Louis, which will lead to the rise of the Antichrist. Genesis 1:14 says that the lights in the sky are for prophetic signs. The two brightest lights in the sky are the sun and the moon, and therefore eclipses can be prophetic. In 2004, Boston beat St. Louis 4-0 on the night of the prophetic eclipse, and this followed Boston beating the Yankees in the American League Championship 4-0. This was because this Game 4 in 2004, under the eclipse next to the Gateway Arch in St. Louis, was a few days before the 44th president was first elected to Washington, D.C. as the senator from Illinois. The year 2004 hints at the number 24 and the year that the Antichrist will be defeated at the second coming of Lord Jesus Christ in 2024, and this is why the MVP in this 2004 World Series was player number 24, Manny Ramirez. It is said that Ramirez broke the curse of the Bambino earlier that year when a foul ball he hit knocked out 2 teeth of a teenager that was living on the farm that Babe Ruth had owned. The curse of the Bambino regards the trade of Babe Ruth to the Yankees, and on this same day that the 2 teeth were knocked out, the New York Yankees were clobbered 22-0 by the Cleveland Indians. President Grover Cleveland was the 22nd president, and the only president to serve non-consecutive terms, having skipped the 23rd presidency, just like how the basketball president that wore jersey number 23 will also serve non-consecutive terms. This is the reason why the Cleveland Indians had a record 22-game winning streak in their 117th season, a winning streak that came to an end on the same day that NASA's Cassini probe made 22 close orbits to the planet Saturn before crashing into Saturn, and the planet Saturn with its rings and its 6-sided North Pole is symbolism for the Antichrist king, and this is why Cleveland's 22-win streak came to an end against the Kansas City Royals. This communicated that the Antichrist king will become the Antichrist in the 117th Congress. The number 9 symbolizes God's judgment, and the teenager was sitting in section 9 and in box 95, and this was exactly 9 weeks before the Red Sox won the World Series and broke the curse of the Bambino, which in turn was exactly another 9 weeks before Obama was sworn in as the senator in Washington, D.C., which makes it exactly 18 weeks between the foul ball hit by player number 24 in 2004 that ended the supposed curse of the Bambino, which is curse of the Antichrist symbolism, and the Antichrist's arrival in Washington, D.C., and again, 18 is symbolism for the number 61 and Obama, and is symbolism for the Antichrist that will be defeated at the second coming of Lord Jesus Christ in 2024, which is why 2 teeth were knocked out, and 2 teeth hinted at the second coming. The foul ball that knocked out the 2 teeth is symbolism for the bird fowl that will knock out the engine of Kamala Harris's airplane, which will lead to the rise of the Antichrist. 9 years later, Boston beat St. Louis again in the 2013 World Series, and this series also began with a stunning double rainbow over Fenway Park right at the beginning of Game 1. Boston's Duck Boat Victory Parade in 2013 stopped at the finish line of the 117th Boston Marathon in order to commemorate the Boston bombing tragedy earlier that year, and this pointed to the 117th Congress, during which the 44th President Antichrist will become the president again. Obama said the words 117th Boston Marathon when the Boston Red Sox visited him at the White House. These 2 World Series between Boston and St. Louis, as well as the 2 World Series in 1985 and 1986, which included Boston, pointed back to the corruption scandals of the two World Series in 1918 and 1919 that were thrown by the Chicago Cubs and the Chicago White Sox for gambling profits. And what confirms that the 1985 and 1986 World Series are connected to the 1918 and 1919 World Series is that in between 1919 and 1985 is 66 years. And 66 is symbolism for the Antichrist that is described in the 66th book in the Bible. The curse of the Bambino that began with the last Red Sox win over the Chicago Cubs in 1918, the year of the Spanish flu pandemic, was because God was pointing to the curse of the Antichrist from Chicago that became president through cheating, for example, his birth certificate lies and forgery, who will persecute God's people through a plague. Boston's loss in the 1986 World Series, after being up 2-0, was known for its Game 6 and the error by Red Sox first baseman Bill Buckner, who wore jersey number 6, which hints at the number 66 and the Antichrist that is described in the 66th book of the Bible. With 2 outs, the Red Sox were twice 1 strike away from winning the World Series before this error. For most of Bill Buckner's career, he wore jersey number 22, which is symbolism for the mark of the Antichrist, and is the reason for the 2 outs and twice being 1 strike away from winning. His last year in baseball was with Boston, and he wore jersey number 22. And this famous baseball player played for 22 years. He wore jersey number 22, and his career was 22 years. This error by Bill Buckner that cost Boston the World Series is one of the most famous moments in baseball history and is said to be part of the curse of the Bambino, and it was symbolism for the curse of the Antichrist. The mark of the Antichrist is symbolized by the number 22. In Bible prophecy, a period of 1,260 days is mentioned 7 times as symbolism for the period of the Antichrist's rule, and Bill Buckner died exactly 1,260 days before the prophetic signs in the 2022 Houston Astros victory parade in Houston, Harris County. And this connection is symbolism for the curse of the Antichrist beginning after the death of Kamala Harris in a plane crash. The curse of the Antichrist will be the mark of the Antichrist, which is symbolized by the number 22, which is why Bill Buckner wore jersey number 22. And he played for 22 years. This 1986 World Series was the 83rd World Series because 83 is the 23rd prime number, and the Antichrist is the basketball president that wore jersey number 23 in high school. The reason for these instances of the number 2, these 2 World Series in which there was a coincidence that the 2 teams from the same geographical area played each other, and the 2 World Series in a row in which 2 teams were down 2-0 and then came back to win the World Series, including the 1985 Kansas City Royals that won 2 World Series exactly 30 years apart, and Al Michaels mentioning how the San Francisco Giants were down 2-0, is that it hints at the second coming of Lord Jesus Christ, the second presidency of the Antichrist, who is in fact the second of 2 antichrists described in Bible prophecy. The first Antichrist is Pope Francis, hence why the San Francisco Giants in this prophetic sign. The Giants is symbolism for fallen angels, which are demons disguising and masquerading themselves as aliens and UFOs. Deception for those that are gullible enough to believe it, those that don't have a solid biblical worldview. And it hints at the number 22, which is symbolism for the mark of the Antichrist. The path of totality of the upcoming great solar eclipse in 2024 will cross over the path of the 2017 eclipse exactly where it peaked and this will engender a giant Tav mark over the nation. The Tav is the 22nd Hebrew letter and is symbolism for the mark of the Antichrist. The paths of the eclipses will intersect over an area of the country nicknamed Little Egypt, right near St. Louis, which is why St. Louis is symbolism for the eclipse and the mark of the Antichrist, and this is why Kamala Harris's plane crash will be in St. Louis. I say this without having any clue where she plans to be on November 26th. Little Egypt and St. Louis connect to Chicago with the I-55 highway. Pictures on the pitching mound symbolize the Antichrist king on the Temple Mount in Bible prophecy. The MVP of the 1985 Kansas City Royals World Series was pitcher number 18, which is symbolism for 6 + 6 + 6 and 666, which is symbolism for the Antichrist. After Al Michaels mentioned the first 2 games of the 1985 World Series, in which the MVP was pitcher number 18, who beat St. Louis, which is symbolized by the I-55 highway, he went on to say that the key to the first 2 games of the 1989 World Series had been the starting pitchers for Oakland. The jersey numbers for these 2 pitchers add up to 55, which is why these 2 pitchers that add up to 55 were pointed to 33 years before the date 11/3, which hints at 33, the day that NASA tweeted a reference to Billy Joel, who had 33 top 40 hits, which was also the day of the home run hit in the World Series by Jeremy Pena, who had a batting average of .333. As well, player 3's 11 runs hinted at 33. This day was also the day that the pitcher on the pitching mound was player 55, Ryan Presley, who pitched the last 5 outs of Game 5. In other words, pitchers on the pitching mound symbolize the Antichrist on the Temple Mount, and the 2 pitchers in 1989 that add up to 55 connect to player 55 in 2022, and this points to King Elvis Presley, Memphis, Tennessee, and the I-55 highway that connects to St. Louis, and St. Louis is symbolism for the 2017 Great American Eclipse, which in turn is symbolism for the mark of the Antichrist, and where Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash. On the date 11/3, NASA tweeted a reference to Billy Joel, who had 33 top 40 hits, and this was 33 years after the release of his album Stormfront. Billy Joel won 6 Grammys, and 6 days after NASA's Artemis 1 tweet that referenced Billy Joel, Artemis 1 was hit by a storm front while sitting on the launch pad. The strongest wind speeds of Hurricane Nicole were recorded at Kennedy Space Center, and it made landfall 70 miles south of Artemis 1 on the launch pad. This hinted at the 70-mile-wide path of totality of the solar eclipse that passed over St. Louis in 2017. A popular news story regarded the uncanny coincidences surrounding Hurricane Charlie and Hurricane Jean in 2004, and Hurricane Ian and Hurricane Nicole in 2022. The storms were 18 years apart. 18 is 6 + 6 + 6. The 18th prime number is 61. The Antichrist was born in 1961 and will become the president again and the Antichrist at the age of 61. 18 years isn't only 6 + 6 + 6 years, but it is also 6 × 6 × 6 months. Hurricane Charlie and Hurricane Jean were 43 days apart, and likewise Hurricane Ian and Hurricane Nicole were also 43 days apart. The location where Hurricane Charlie and Hurricane Ian made landfall were almost exactly the same location. And likewise, the location where Hurricane Jean made landfall and Hurricane Nicole made landfall are also almost exactly the same location. The paths of these 2 sets of hurricanes were almost identical, and like the paths of the two solar eclipses, these 4 hurricanes engender 2 sets of Tav marks, which is symbolism for the mark of the Antichrist. Hurricane Nicole was another prophetic warning for the American church and its Nicolaitan doctrine. The reason for all of this was to point to the Nicolaitan doctrine of the American evangelical church, which is the root reason for why much of the church has taken the mark of the Antichrist. It is judgment for their Nicolaitan theology and doctrine, and the works that are a product of this theology and doctrine, that Jesus said he hates and is coming to make war on with the sword of his mouth. Therefore, this prophetic sign is about its name, and its name is Nicole, because hurricanes are named in alphabetical order. The storm before Hurricane Nicole began with the letter M, and the storm after Nicole began with the letter O. These are the initials of Michelle Obama, who will be the first woman president. Hurricane Nicole hit Artemis 1 on the launch pad, and the goal of the Artemis 1 mission is to put the first woman on the moon. NASA's Artemis 1 tweet referenced Billy Joel, who had an album named Stormfront and who won 6 Grammys, and 6 days later, a storm front hit NASA's Artemis 1 on the launch pad. Billy Joel had 33 top 40 hits, and 33 days after Hurricane Nicole hit Artemis 1 and engendered a Tav mark over Florida that symbolizes the mark of the Antichrist, will be the day that it is predicted that Michelle Obama will become the president, which will lead to her husband becoming the president and the Antichrist, who will persecute God's people through the mark of the Antichrist. Once this prediction for Kamala Harris's death in a plane crash due to a bird strike in St. Louis on November 26th comes to pass, you should know that you should watch every minute of every video on this channel. However, time is short, and so I will leave a list on my website of the most important videos. In the most important video on this channel, which is titled God's Purpose for These Predictions, I will explain the reason for why God has given me a voice through this prediction that is from God. You are making a very grave and serious error if you think you already know how I was able to know this prediction, and more importantly, if you think you already know why I was able to know this prediction. It would be very foolish for you to skip watching this most important video. You will have missed the point of this prediction. In the description box below, I will leave a link to this video. If you are a Christian, once this prediction has come to pass, you should know that you are obligated to share this video and to not ever stop sharing this video. The price you must pay for having learned this precious knowledge is to work towards letting others know about this information. And unless you are completely consumed with another ministry or have a health condition, you should know that you are obligated on a daily basis to hand out flyers that promote this video channel on street corners, car windshields, in busy parking lots, in mailboxes, or if anything, as you come across people in your daily life. For example, in the bank or in the aisles of the supermarket as you are shopping. If you are shy, you need to overcome this. Courage isn't a lack of fear, it is action in spite of it. Please contact me for the PDF file for the flyer. The main reason why many people will not agree with this statement that a Christian is obligated to work to get the news out to the world about this prediction is the bad Nicolaitan theology and doctrine that the vast majority of, quote, Christians, unquote, have, which is why the modern church, including and especially the evangelical church, is the lukewarm, stagnant church of Laodicea. And the very purpose of this prediction is to prove to these quote-unquote Christians that they have the Nicolaitan doctrine that Jesus said he hates and is coming to make war on with the sword of his mouth. Most quote-unquote Christians don't fear God, and they don't really get the Bible. And this is the primary reason and purpose for the end times period of the Antichrist. In short, it's time for those that have barely been doing anything for the kingdom to finally make some serious sacrifices that will cost them, and to do some serious work, and to use their bags of gold and produce some fruit before they are thrown into the fire. When this prediction has come to pass, it will be a very, very big bag of gold. I encourage you to use it. Aliens and UFOs are demons masquerading as aliens and UFOs for the gullible that will believe it because they don't have a solid biblical worldview. Most people's spiritual experiences are demonic deception, especially if they are not a true follower of Christ. The New Age or New Spirituality or Consciousness religion is evil deception from Satan. Satan and demons will give Catholics and New Agers spiritual experiences that they think confirm for them their beliefs, but these spiritual experiences are demonic deception for those that refuse to love the truth and so be saved. There is a spiritual reality behind the material world that we see. The wages for sin is death. Sin means to miss the mark. No one is good, all have sinned. Because of sin, people are captives of the ruler of this world, Satan. People's souls belong to Satan, whose power over people is death. God took the form of a man, Jesus Christ, and paid the ransom that is owed to the ruler of this world. Through Christ's death and resurrection, he defeated sin and he overcame Satan's power in death. It is through Christ and his Spirit that it is possible for everyone to be forgiven of their sin, and we can have eternal life if we choose it. We can choose to follow Jesus out of captivity from sin and Satan, or we can choose to reject this and remain a slave to this world, sin, and to Satan. If one rejects Jesus Christ, after they die, they will pay the price for their sin in hell, and then they will die the second death, and their soul will cease to exist. Believing in Christ means much more than simple intellectual agreement. It means to repent of sin and completely commit one's life and become a willing slave to Jesus and his kingdom. Jesus said we need to be born again, which implies a death of the self and a death to this world. Believing in Jesus implies living out one's faith through taking action that typically involves risk and sacrifice. This demonstration of faith through action is what it means to have faith and to believe in Jesus. Some Christians will tell you otherwise, but they are deceived, and they ignore countless passages in the Bible. Please leave a like and upvote the video, and once this prediction has come to pass, share this video with everyone you know, and more, don't stop sharing it everywhere in social media. It is essential that everyone immediately read the homepage of my website, TrumpPrediction.com.